Welcome back to the New Indian Express's ThinkEdu Conclave 2021. Continuing the series of great sessions, we have some interesting and intriguing conversations lined up for you today as well. So stay tuned and enjoy. It is important to keep in touch with your roots, and mythologies help you stay rooted. We have two eminent authors who deal with just this, bringing the mythological treasures of India alive. Please welcome best-selling author Amish Tripathi, who has penned the Shiva trilogy and the Ramchandra series, among others. We also have with us Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, an Indian-American author, poet, and the professor of writing at the University of Houston. She is the author of The Mistress of Spices and The Forest of Enchantment, among other novels and short stories. We also have Kaveri Bamzai, senior journalist and author, joining the conversation.
I just want to take a moment to plug Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni's new book, which is, it's truly magnificent. It's The Last Queen. It's on Rani Jindal, and someone whom we ought to have known so much about, Amish. But somehow, it's one of those stories that's lost in time, lost to history. And I want to, of course, put that question to Chitra, but I want to come to you first, Amish, and ask you, why does this happen?
So there is a problem in the way our history is written, which is why we need authors such as Chitra to revive interest, because our history was written by, at least our modern history, was written by colonial rulers. And regrettably, our establishment historians continued with that same approach. It is extremely unfortunate. So you find, I mean, this is relatively recent, Rani Jindal. I mean, this shouldn't have been a problem, but the way even the relatively recent history is shown, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah is defamed as per British, policies. Maharaja Dalip Singh is defamed again as per British policies, and very regrettably, our establishment historians have carried on this nonsensical approach. They're more loyal to the British Raj than to India, and this is reflected even in our medieval and ancient history. The way the Turkic invaders are shown, the way our ancient history is shown, the British Raj nonsense that India was never a nation. We never had a sense of a nation before the British connected us with their railway network, which is utter nonsense. It's not true. The Vishnu Puran has a lovely line describing our concept of our nation. The Vishnu Puran is at least 2,000 years old. It describes the Indian subcontinent. Uttaram yat samudrasya, himadras jaiva dakshinam, varsham tada bharatam nama, bharti yatra santati. These lines have been erased from our history books, which is why we need someone like Chitra. There's this wonderful line I'd heard once in Africa, that till the lions get their storytellers, the stories of the hunt will glorify the hunter. When the former hunters need to know that we lions have our own storytellers now, and we are not going to follow your nonsensical interpretations anymore.
Amish, that's so lovely, because Chitra's book begins with Chinua Achebe, and the exact quotation, it's so lovely, Chitra, that he seems to have read your mind. Until the lion.
I know, that was a lovely synchronicity.
I just want to read that line out, Amish. And Chitra's book begins with it. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So fantastic. So Chitra, talk about what drew you to Rani Jindal, and what has drawn you to Draupadi, what has drawn you to Sita, but what drew you to Rani Jindal specifically, since we're talking about The Last Queen first?
So, Amish is so right. I think he and I are really on the same wavelength, as there are so many wonderful, truly inspiring characters in our mythology, in our history. And of course, I'm particularly interested in the women who, even more than the men, have been pushed aside, pushed to the wings. And in the case of a woman like Rani Jindal, defamed by the British, who created this huge smear campaign because they were so afraid of the love that her people had for her. Even after she's imprisoned by them, most unrighteously, they create this huge smear campaign showing, that she was, she was a truly evil woman. She had no values, she had no morals, etc., etc. So I think often there's been either a westernized, a kind of colonial storytelling about our great characters, particularly our great women characters, or there's been a patriarchal kind of refashioning of women like Draupadi and even Sita, refashioned in very different ways to kind of fit the patriarchal model that has come down to us through centuries. So Rani Jinda's story came to me. It was truly like a magical event. I had not heard about her, just like you, although I should have.
Yeah.
But actually, we hadn't heard about her because there's very, very little, even in the history books written by Indians. There's a lot about her husband, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. There's actually a lot about her son, Maharaja Dalip Singh. But she, who is kind of the glue, who puts all of this together, who brings all of these other characters together, she's kind of was missing. But I was very blessed because when I was in Kolkata some years back for another book, which was coming out in India, to present that book at the Kolkata Literary Meet, I walked into the auditorium a little early ahead of my presentation, and William Dalrymple was presenting his book Kohinoor. And just it so happened that as I walked in, he had projected onto the screen the painting of Maharani Jinda, which became my cover, which I later chose as my cover.
It's so beautiful. Yeah.
Yes, and it really shows her character, that stoic look, that indomitable look, even though by this time her son has commissioned this painting and she's older, she's not in good health, but you can feel that strength.
And Chitra, I want to put this question to both of you. Yet there are so many interpretations, not just of our, heroes and heroines in history, but also in myth. There's so many things that you have to read. There's so many people that you have to be little constituencies who sort of, might get outraged or might get offended. You have to sort of, there's a little person sitting on your shoulder telling you, should you go there? Should you not go there? Is that something that you are conscious of when you're writing?
I'll say my part, but I know Amish has some good things to say about this as well. Every time I sit to research and therefore I'm thinking of writing, you're right. The research is like, I want everything. I want to know every single thing. But when I write, yes, of course, I'm concerned about, especially our mythological stories, stories about, Mother Sita, particularly. I was very concerned. Draupadi also, because generally she has been looked down on. She has been demonized as the woman who started the Mahabharata war because of a personal vendetta, which is not true. When you go back to the original Mahabharata, you see that the story is much more complicated. She did not start the Mahabharata war. There were many causes, most of them male causes. But I'm concerned. But finally, I have to say to myself that if I did the research, I'm not coming at it with any personal agenda. I just want to tell the stories of these wonderful, inspiring women in the hopes that they will inspire us today and that they will teach us something. So that, that's an agenda I'm hoping that all sane-minded people will be for, because it really shows the glory of India. It shows the amazing courage of these women. And it shows how complex they were and what great leadership qualities they had that we can certainly, as women today, we can learn so much from each one of them. Different lessons. Each one is teaching a different lesson.
Right. That's true. And we'll come to that thought again, the leadership lessons, I think, from each of these women, especially Rani Jinder. Amish, in your case as well, there's so much research, there's so many different Ramayans, there's so many different Mahabharats. You've written about 3 principal characters, Ram, Sita, Ravan, and your interpretations have also varied from what is the popular norm. So how do you deal with any criticism that comes your way, if it comes your way, that, this is not the Ravan we knew, he's not so accomplished. And, there was a recent outcry, in fact, when an actor said that Ravan is not necessarily a villain. And I immediately thought of your book, and, I wish that these people had read it and they would understand that he's not. There's so much more to him. So this kind of popular culture approach that we have to some of these people, that he's a hero, he's a villain, these black and white sort of descriptions. How do you deal with that when you actually know so much more?
Firstly, my books, I mean, and Goddess Sita, I've shown her as a warrior.
Yeah.
With Ravan, I've shown him as this thing, and they're not really secrets. The books are, I mean, the Ramchandra series has sold some 2 million copies put together.
Yes.
Shiva trilogy had some 3 million around. So a little more than 2 million, I think. So it's not really a secret, and I faced no controversy.
Right.
So I'm actually living proof of the example that Indians are willing to hear different points of view, different interpretations, and that is actually our core tradition.
Yeah.
A lot of I feel a lot of the opposition at times could be for political reasons, or artists themselves. Let's be honest, artists themselves create controversy because it's easy publicity and you make sales through. Let's be honest, it happens.
Right.
If you yourself avoid controversy, it doesn't happen. But there is a second reason as well, which I think we should be mindful of. We as a culture have faced not just violent attacks, but even intellectual artisan attacks for over 800, 900 years. Repeat, our temples have been attacked, idols demolished, repeatedly told that our gods are false, and that we are debauched, we are decadent. We've been told that repeatedly. After so many centuries of colonial rule, first the Turks and then the Europeans, and we became free, things didn't change. Our elite, our English-speaking elite, continued that culture of denigration. Maybe it was a little more subtle as compared to the colonial rulers, but denigration of our culture, of our traditions. So it would not be surprising for those Indians who are the vast majority of Indians who are not from the Anglicized elite to see the Anglicized elite with an air of suspicion, right? That whatever they do, they're trying to look down upon us, they're trying to denigrate our culture. And perhaps those of us who speak in English should be mindful of it. Now, I know the three of us are lucky that we have roots in the real India, but we've also got English education, so we've kind of got our feet on both boats. So we should be, and much of that non-Anglicized India is what has become much richer and much more powerful over 30 years of economic reforms. What has happened over the last 30 years is massive social change. The Anglicized elite does not control the narrative anymore.
Right.
Does not control economic levers, or indeed even political or academic levers anymore. We have seen the establishment elite, the establishment historians repeatedly run down our own heroes. Chhatrapati Shivaji, who was, in my mind, perhaps one of the greatest Indians of the last millennium, was called in the history book that I read in my school as a mountain rat.
Yeah.
And I'm originally from UP, but I'm from Maharashtra. I remember I was offended. What the hell is this? Right? Now, so you can understand that there is a real India which sees anyone who speaks English with an air of suspicion that these guys have some agenda and they actually look down upon us, and they are actually cultural inheritors of the British Raj. So perhaps those who write in English should be mindful of it. And actually, if you speak with humility, with grace, anyway, good manners is a good idea all the time. Right? But if you speak with humility and grace, then you don't trigger those things. What you said of Ravan not being a villain, Ravan being accomplished. I said it in a Hindi lit fest in Lucknow. And I said it was covered by the largest, largest Hindi language newspaper. In fact, the largest newspaper in the world.
In the world.
Right? Yeah, and I got applause for that line. I said it in Hindi. I said रावण खलनायक नहीं था, रावण में भी कुछ खूबियां थी, और ये प्रभु श्री राम ने भी कहा था, सिर्फ वाल्मीकि रामायण में नहीं, कंबन रामायण में भी, and people actually applauded for that because they understood. And then I said in Hindi, just because I respect Ravan doesn't mean I don't worship Lord Ram, and Indians understand that. So the point I'm trying to make is perhaps it's not so much what we say, maybe it's the bias of the real Indians, perhaps fairly, against the anglicized elite, which comes out at times because they assume that boss, ye to अंग्रेजों की बात बोलेंगे, they will look down upon us.
Right.
Perhaps we should be mindful of that.
Right. I think good point. Chitra, what do you say to that? Because
no, I agree. I agree so much because I think one of the reasons that Forest of Enchantments, which is my novel where Mother Sita is telling her story, has been so successful, and I'm always thankful for that because you never know when a book comes out what people will think, is that while I'm glorifying Sita, I'm not putting Ram down.
Right.
And that is really important, especially for me as I'm telling women's stories, that to make a woman the central role, the central voice in a book is important, but it doesn't mean that you have to put down men. Right. Sita's glory doesn't depend on putting down anybody, Ravan or Ram or anyone. And in my book too, Ravan is a complex character and he has many good qualities. And in fact, the reason why he goes to abduct Sita is because he is avenging his own sister who has come to him and said, brother, I want justice. So we can see how our Indian tales, our ancient tales, were very complex. As Amish was saying, they're very nuanced. And it would be wrong to take one kind of, I don't know, a one-sided interpretation that that plays up one character but downplays everybody else. And I've tried in all of my books to show the different sides of different characters. The same with Palace of Illusions. Draupadi is the center of the story, but I hope I've been able to show even like people on the Kaurava side, what were they thinking and why did they do what they did? And even someone like Duryodhan has a lot of courage. He has a lot of nobility. So, that is the greatness of our Indian culture. It's not black and white. It's not heroes and villains. It's like great people and great women, especially, who are involved in this kind of complicated dance of, dance of life, as it were. So I'm certainly, it makes me very happy that so many people in India now who are readers are able to see and appreciate this. And I'm very excited because now a number of my books have been translated into the Indian languages. And that makes me very, very happy because I want these books to reach not just the English speakers, but all readers as far as possible in India, because I think there's something they can all resonate with.
Right. Amish, I wanted to also...
Yeah, if I can...
Yeah, sure.
Kaveri, if I can just add one more thing, like Sita, warrior of Mithila, I wrote of her as a warrior.
Yeah.
You won't believe how many emails and tweets and these things I've got from the Mithila region.
Right.
Saying that they love it. Yeah, so Indians are willing to listen to a different point of view, but we should speak it with respect. That's all.
Right. Amish, the other point that has struck me of late is, when you look at all the modern myths that we see on, on screen, especially from the West, the Marvel universe or the DC comics, even the new Godzilla versus King Kong, the Monsterverse. I think the world is ready for our own superheroes now. Why are we not telling these very same stories which you and Chitra have written? Why are we not able to see them on screen the way we see, say a Bahubali? We did do Bahubali. But, when I speak to filmmakers and actors, they tell me that I spoke to Ashutosh Gowarikar recently because I thought, Lagan, Swades, he's a man who knows what epics are all about. He said it'll take me at least 3 to 5 years just to read everything on the Mahabharata. Then only can I begin, Or Amir, for instance, Amir Khan has been talking about, a series on Mahabharata for the longest time. He's put down 18 books that he has to read even before he begins contemplating this. So, is there, when do you think we'll see something so spectacular, which I feel is something that we can do? We have so many of these heroes. Just from Mahabharata, for instance, we can do at least, I don't know how many series. When is that going to happen, Amish?
I think it's a matter of time.
Yeah.
I agree with you that the market is there.
Yeah.
If you
And a
see the
global
Marvel,
market.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you see the Marvel universe, I genuinely believe that that many of the Westerners have actually turned pagan.
Yeah.
They just don't know it yet, right? The way, because actually the pagan approach, Hindus, or rather India, were the last surviving pagans. Most of them were wiped out,
Okay.
or most of them violently. But among the core of the pagan approach is, an acceptance of multiple truths,
Yeah.
shades of gray, no simplistic black and whites, various respect for women. This is like the traditional markers of the pagan approach. You see the Marvel universe, you see they're popular. This is, I mean, Captain America can be called the equivalent of Apollo
Yeah.
in the character and approach. Iron Man was the equivalent of Dionysus, and their interplay, it actually kind of echoes Greco-Roman, I mean, it's Thor as well, Thor of,
Exactly.
of.
Right.
So I think the market is there, but look, I'll tell you how it works. Because I've turned producer also with my latest book, Swedev, I'm producing it.
Yeah.
How it works in the movies and series space, anything on Rama and Mahabharata, or the traditional bits, is the budgets are massive.
Massive.
Okay. So it would be Bahubali times, 3 or 4. The risks are extremely high. Okay. And how it works in this space is you need a core market to justify the core budget. Then the profits you make on international markets, because you can't be sure international banega ki nahi banega. If you try to make a crossover film, you fall neither here nor there. So one of the things is to go with that crouching tiger, hidden dragon approach, which is be true to who you are,
Yeah.
service your own market, and if it crosses over, great, right? So the Indian market has to be big enough to justify uh, the budgets of something like this. Any movie like this, you're talking about, perhaps 400 crores per movie, and you will
Right.
need at least 3 movies or 4 movies. That's a whole lot of that much money has never been invested
Yeah.
in movies in India, even in a series, to be justified only by the Indian market, right? But it's a matter of time. It's a few years, because look, we don't have a shortage of population. Economic growth is happening. The kind of budgets we had, a 10 crore film was a massive budget, 15, 20 years ago. Today, easily you can make 100, 150 crores. It's a matter of time. We
Right.
will reach the place where India itself will justify these budgets. Then these things will get made a lot more. It's a matter of time, few years, maybe 5, 6 years.
Right. We already have things like Ashwatthama being made and Hiranyakashipu. Very interesting.
But remember, those are single movies. You can
Exactly.
take a bet on a single movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you're committing to, the story of Lord Shiva or Ramayana or Mahabharata, you're committing to, 3, 4, 5 movies at least. That is too much commitment, to be fair. Budgets are just too much. The risk is just too high to be justified only by the Indian market.
Right. Chitra, there's been so much talk about the adaptation of Forest of Enchantments and Palace of Illusions. Palace of Illusions more, I think. Draupadi excites a lot more interest, I think, because she's so much more complex, at least to me and to a lot of other people. What is
She's very feisty, right?
Yeah.
She's very feisty.
What is
Although Mother Sita is feisty enough. I hope I've shown that in
Of course,
Forest
of
of
course.
Enchantments.
Yeah. But what has your experience been with the idea of adaptation?
Well, Palace of Illusions is now optioned.
Right.
So, and it was optioned just before COVID hit. So everything was put on the shelf for now. But now, as hopefully we are getting out of the pandemic, I
Right.
hope that they're going to move forward. They have, I'm not allowed to divulge, but they have got some good, wonderful actors in place,
Okay.
including someone to play Draupadi. So,
Okay.
fingers crossed. We will see what happens. The Last Queen has also been optioned, so I'm very excited
lovely.
about
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah.
Because what I was listening in fascination to Amish because he knows so much. Amish, how do you know all this stuff? But it's great listening to him.
Yeah.
And because I think he's right. And whenever Amish is saying this, whatever he's saying today, I'm like nodding, I'm agreeing.
Yeah.
Because I do think that we have the most amazing
Absolutely.
heroes and heroines. The world literally absolutely needs to know about them. And of course, our own people, I think, will be there's a great love for mythology, which makes me so happy that in India, there is a great love for our own mythology and our history, and our readers show that. So I think that that is a big way to go.
Right.
That should be, those films should be really focused on and given the budget, the interest, the loving care that really makes people realize or reminds people. A visual reminder is always powerful. I think book reminders are also very powerful of our great history, our great culture. There's just a lot to be proud of, to learn from, and to bring into our everyday lives.
Right.
And that's really one of my major projects, is to inspire people with tales from our past,
Right.
our ever-living past.
Exactly. Chitra, I wanted to ask you, when you were researching Rani Jinda, for instance, what were the when you looked at the available resources, the available research on her, were there any filters that you had to sort of apply in your mind that this could possibly have this bias, that could have that bias? So when you're researching it, a subject, do you have that sense that you have to sort of peel a layer before you get to the bottom?
Oh, yes. And especially in the case of Rani Jinda, because so many of the sources were British.
Right.
There was a lot of peeling, unpeeling that I
Yeah.
had to do. Because, they came from the point of view of, oh my goodness, this woman is big trouble.
Right.
How can we tell her story in a way that minimizes her, that takes away her glory, that throws not only a light of suspicion on her, but creates maybe some hatred and some disgust of her character. So, they just put out so many untrue stories about her having multiple lovers, even when Maharaja Ranjit Singh was alive, that even Maharaja Dalip Singh is not Maharaja Ranjit Singh's son because she was this, this profligate woman. I mean, and when you really begin to, so I had to do a lot of judging and evaluating of the sources.
Right.
You know how they say, consider the source, and I really had to do that. And, one of the things is Maharaja Ranjit Singh was an amazing, a very perceptive man.
Yeah.
He was not going to be fooled by something. If he says, Dalip Singh is my son, and he acknowledges him in open court, that is a fact to be taken much more seriously than what the British wrote and passed out all around India, especially all around Punjab. Or when Lady Logan, who becomes, Lord and Lady Logan become Dalip Singh's
guardians.
Yes, they become his guardians when he's torn away from his mother. She's put in prison, and then he's given to Lord and Lady Logan. So when she is writing about Maharani Jinda, she already has a lot of biases and perhaps some guilt. And so I had to read through those things to really look at what were the facts of the matter.
Right. And there are some scenes that are so moving, Chitra, when, without giving too much away, when, Dilip Singh hands the Kohinoor back to, Queen Victoria. There's some scenes which you recreated, which really, make you feel that you're right there when it's happening. And yet you feel so sad about so much of our history being just so, badly written for us, what do you have to say to
Yeah.
historians? I mean, what have they been doing all this time?
Well, I think Amish put it very well. They were continuing in some kind of strange, I don't know, colonial tradition. And instead of really doing what I was talking about, which is just taking the facts, considering the source, removing the biases, and looking at what actually happened, right? Because in the case of Maharaja Dalip Singh, it is a clear and so heartbreaking example of cultural colonialization, right? Where not only is he deprived of his kingdom illegally, because Punjab is at that time a protectorate. The British should be protecting it, not taking it away from a minor. But having taken his kingdom away from him, having taken the Kohinoor away from him, they create in his mind a sense of inferiority, of not only not having pride in his culture, but actually being ashamed of the Indian part of him, the Punjabi part of him. They make him forget his entire history. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't remember anything about his father and the grandeur of his father's empire, which was his own kingdom also. And he's made to look up at Queen Victoria, and he just worships Queen Victoria because she's kind to him, and she invites him over to his house where he plays with her children, carrying them on his back. When I read those things in the sources, it just broke my heart. And then I thought, how would his mother have felt, who all her life, she just fought and fought against the British in every way she knew. When she comes to England and she sees this attitude in her son, and he's called like Victoria's Black Prince, which is, so, I don't know, so derogatory.
You don't even know what to call it. It's beyond racism,
Yes, right? So how would she have felt? So that becomes part of my novel, The Last Queen. And how, out of that terrible situation, is she going to find a victory? I think that is the most amazing thing about Maharani Jinda, how at the end of her life, she will have a moral victory over the British.
Right. And even the way she was cremated, I mean, it took him a whole year to bring her back, and then he couldn't even go back to Punjab.
That's right. And, that shows again
the cruelty of the British Empire. And you think, all this while we have been taught to believe that they were very civilized and, they always observed the rule of law. They did not.
They did not. Absolutely. Whenever it was not convenient for them, and whenever the law was not in their favor, they happily went away from it. And I don't know, perhaps this is the case of conquerors in many places, but it was certainly true of colonial rule. And you are right. It is very sad that even after she dies, and the last thing she says is to him, one of the last things she says is, please don't leave my body here. I cannot rest in the country of my enemy. Take me back to the country that I love. But even and it takes him, like you said, over a year. And even when he does manage to take her there, they're like, you can't go to Punjab. And she had said, please put my ashes with my husband's ashes, because, he was the great love of her life. And they wouldn't let Maharaja Dalip Singh do it. It's only much later when her granddaughter, and that's not in this novel, but her granddaughter, Sophia, is going to go and manage to do that.
That's another lovely story.
Yes.
That's a novel by itself. Yes, Amish.
Yeah. No, if I can just add something in terms of historians to what Chitra said, how our own historians have been, I so agree with her, are mentally colonized, our establishment historians who've written our history for the last 70 years. The way the British Raj has been presented. I genuinely believe the British Raj was essentially the Nazis with better PR. That's who they were.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that we have to hate. That doesn't mean that we have to hate today's British
Right.
for what the British Raj did. That's ridiculous. Today's British haven't done anything. We can be allies with them, but we must speak the truth of what the British Raj was. It wasn't this, land of fair play and law. No, the British Raj was built on the biggest drug running racket in the history of humanity.
Right.
A Bengali author had said very rightly, Queen Victoria was essentially Dawood Ibrahim with better headdress. Okay, that's what the empire was built on, right?
Yeah.
They killed the British Raj killed, estimates vary, but at least between 30 to 60 million Indians in man-made famines that they created. The Economist magazine, the venerable Economist magazine today, you should read there, and they are available online now. Over 100 years ago, when the famine was taking place in the Deccan, the Economist magazine had justified those famines. Said the British Raj cannot be responsible for the indolent Indians, right, who breed too much and deserve to die. The Economist magazine, right? After the 1857 revolt, what is called the Thuggi, suppression, they killed at least between 5 to 10 million Purabiyas essentially, because the rebellion was led by Eastern UPites, Biharis, the core of it. Eastern UPites, Biharis, and Bengalis, the troops, and they massacred millions of them. That's how India was settled, right? Over 10, 15, 20 years. They were Nazis with better PR, right? And we must speak the truth of it. That does not mean that we should hate the British today. I am not suggesting, community vengeance, historical vengeance. Those are very dangerous concepts. But we must speak the truth. And it is an indictment of our establishment historians of the last 70 years that they haven't brought out these truths, that they actually believe that the British Raj was good for us.
Right.
Yeah, nonsense.
Right. So, Amish, I mean, writers like you and Chitra are doing their part, but what do we need to change? Because we keep hearing of the new education policy, but it never quite, the textbooks are just tinkered with and, they go back to being what they were. How do we create this culture of revising our history without, as you said, necessarily saying that, all our invaders were evil and therefore their descendants are so, which is a ridiculous concept. But we still have to go back and look at our
You have to
history.
speak the truth.
Yeah, exactly. How do we do
It must be
Create
done.
that culture?
It must be done by unbiased scholars who approach it with a sense of calm historical perspective, not seeking to justify it, not seeking to create hatred either. Just speak it for what it is. And yes, the British Raj as a whole was horrible. But every British viceroy, every British ruler out here was a monster like Hitler. No, that's not true. Winston Churchill was monstrous, no doubt. Robert Clive was monstrous, no doubt. But Bentinck wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? We must speak that. Aurangzeb was monstrous, no doubt, but Akbar wasn't. Akbar was relatively decent. Alauddin Khilji was monstrous. Mahmud Ghazni was monstrous, no doubt. But Razia Sultan wasn't. Right? So we must speak calmly of our history. And I think one of the best things to do would be to simply translate the texts that they themselves wrote. So, and if you want to know Aurangzeb, just translate the Alamgiri. He himself says he's so proud to, massacre so many people, destroy so many temples. I mean, it's his own words, right? Or make popular the works of Robert Clive or Winston Churchill, who himself justified the Bengal famine, which he ordered, right? Where millions of people were killed.
Right.
Just make those available. Those texts are there. Texts from our own ancestors are also there. But realize once again that this should not preach hatred today. What the British Raj did has nothing to do with the British today. And the Turkic invaders very obviously have nothing to do with Muslims today. Muslims today are Indians. They're not descendants of... The Turks were foreigners. Despite what our Bollywood movies tell us, Akbar did not look like Prithviraj Kapoor, Razia Sultan did not look like Hema Malini, Alauddin Khilji did not look like Ranveer Singh. They were foreigners. To us, they would have looked Chinese.
Right.
They did not speak Urdu. Urdu is an Indian language. Urdu is our language. They did not speak Urdu. They spoke Turkic or Persian. We wouldn't have understood anything of what they were saying. So we need to just bring out the truth. That is all. Realize that they were foreigners. Many of them were truly monstrous. Some of them were actually decent. And speak the truth of what happened and realize that we are free now. See the past for what it was, see it with truth, and then move on. Let the truth set us free.
Right. Absolutely. Chitra, I think
Yeah. I wanted to add.
Yeah.
I wanted to add a little bit. I agree with Amish, and I think also it's important to really look at our history and look at the really inspiring people.
Yeah.
And because if we can. And to show, as Amish was saying, that they come from different communities, they belonged to different religions, they came at different times, there were men and women, and that we really do need to see what were their great achievements, because as Amish was saying, the 1857, which I would call the first war of independence, which the British gave terrible names to, including when I went to school, the books call it the Sipai Mutiny.
Yeah.
What? It was their war of independence, right? It was our first. And the way the British treated those vanquished soldiers, they shot them out of cannons.
Yeah.
They were like massacred in terrible, terrible, painful ways. We need to remember those things, because another important historical saying that I believe in is those who don't remember history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
And if we don't learn the lessons of history, and Maharani Jinda's life, which I hope I've shown in The Last Queen, has a very important lesson for us. Why did the kingdom of Punjab, which was so strong, which really had such a great army, why did it fall?
Yeah.
It was because of inside treachery. People couldn't come together. Why is it that the British could go to kingdom after kingdom after kingdom, and each one of them falling? Only Maharaja Ranjit Singh sees it, and he tells Maharani Jinda, he says that, they turn people against each other. In each country, in each little kingdom, they have, or not little kingdom, big kingdoms, they have been able to turn people into traitors, infighting. And because the kingdoms could not come together, the British were able to, one by one, just conquer them, right? Using whatever underhand methods. So I think there's a great lesson there for India and for the US, which is that we have to come together. We have to forget our differences and come together as a country, come together as a nation. That is the great lesson of history. Otherwise, we become weakened and outside forces can take advantage of that.
Absolutely. And what is the one lesson that Jinda's life sort of teaches you?
The great lesson that I learned from her is she never gives up.
Right.
If she believes in something, she's going to follow it. And she never gives up, no matter how difficult things are. And I think we can all learn something from that, right? Sometimes it will seem like all of the forces of the world are against us. But if we believe in what we're doing, I think Maharani Jinda teaches us, we keep going. And if we can't win in one way, if we can't win outwardly, we can still win the moral victory, which she does.
Right. Any last thoughts, Chitra and Amish, before we go to what has been a fascinating conversation?
I think I want to end by saying that I am always so happy that people are enjoying these stories, these timeless stories. I think that I have to say I respect the audience of India, the readers of India so much, because they take these stories to their heart. I get so many letters, and I'm sure Amish gets even more, saying that I read this, I learned something about my culture that I didn't know, and it's now become a living part of me. I've learned so much from these characters. They have become my friends. They have become my inspiration. So that makes me so, so thankful and happy that, we have such a great reading public. And I hope that for them, there will be more and more stories of our past, which lives on in our books and in our hearts. So we've got to make these stories available to people.
What are you working on next, Chitra?
Well, I'm really on a historical streak. So I'm working on a novel that's based right around independence and partition. And it will be set in Bengal because that's particularly my part of the country. And when Amish was talking about the Bengal famine, it really struck me because I've just finished doing the research on the Bengal famine of like 1942, 43. And it was totally created by the British. So terrible. I was looking at the old photographs and I was literally sitting there crying, thinking, this was done to us by the British. And nobody took them to task over it, right? Nobody said to them, what is this terrible thing you have done?
And our historians have airbrushed this sort of history. And we are all reasonably well read. First time I discovered of the Bengal famine is when I went to study in Calcutta. I didn't know about it before. Seriously, shame on our historians. Over 3 million Indians were, and it was a famine ordered by Winston Churchill. You should read Chitra Banerjee's book, Chitra, you'll love it. And seriously, what are our historians doing? I mean, what have they been doing rather for the last 70 years?
Amish, what are you working on next? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm working on the 4th book of the Ramchandra series. That's even when I do the first thing my readers ask me, if I post a tweet that I'm going on holiday, I'm cycling, there'll be someone saying, why are you wasting time? Go finish that book. So that will be out this year. It'll be out by the end of this year. And there's also a non-fiction book. We released Dharma, which is explaining the core concepts of Dharma. My sister Bhavna Didi and I, we wrote it. So we have a follow-up coming up to that on the beauty of idol worshipping. So that we're also hoping to release this year.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful talking to both of you, and more power to your pen, more power to your storytelling. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kaveri. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and Amish, always great to be on the screen together.
Always a pleasure to chat with Chitra, Kaveri, and thank you so much. As always, you hosted it beautifully.
Hope you enjoyed that session. If you want to catch the other sessions, you can log on to eventexpress.com, newindianexpress.com, or even edxlive.com. If you are more of a social media person, you can also join the conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you for watching.